5 people murdered in 2 days, a mom and her college-age daughters, and a couple in their retirement years. Their brutal deaths shook Northeast Ohio.
Do you know if he's waiting outside at the residence or is he still in the house?
I don't know. He just said there's a body and I said, oh my God, I'm calling the cops.
All clues pointed to a close friend of the victims.
At that point, it was, all right, George is our number one suspect.
Investigators closed in, arresting George Brinkman after an hours-long standoff.
He was a coward. He'd rather take other people's lives than take himself.
And the FBI pried a confession from their suspect, but it didn't come easy.
Yeah, I'm being blamed for it.
No, not being blamed for it. I'm going to ask you if you're going to do it.
Hell no.
What does it take to catch a killer? I'm Sara Goldenberg, and you're listening to Dark Side of the Land, The Killings, Cover-Up, and Manhunt, Confessions of George Brinkman, Episode 2. Where we left off, Brinkman just confessed to killing Suzanne Taylor and her daughters, Taylor and Kylie Pfeiffer. Now you're about to find out what happened to Bobby and Jean John, his next victims.
There's so many questions I have.
Plus, we'll hear from Suzanne's brother and find out why, 5 years later, the suspect's conviction in one of these cases is on the line. A cold-blooded killer, once a childhood friend of Suzanne Taylor's, turned on her and her daughters one June day back in 2017, doing the unimaginable, tying up Suzanne, Taylor, and Kylie to a bed in their North Royalton home and killing them one by one. George Brinkman's confession to the FBI became key for law enforcement, gathering evidence to build a case against him.
I just stood there, was walking back and forth in front of the bed with a knife so they could see it.
George Brinkman's confession spanned 2 days, but it became clear to investigators not everything he's telling them is true. Before they move on to the case of the couple murdered in their Stark County home, FBI agents take Brinkman back through Saturday morning, before Suzanne, Taylor, and Kylie were killed. A deputy from the Stark County Sheriff's Office now sits in the interrogation room too. At the time, Brinkman said he was doing double duty, watching Bobby and Jean John's dog and his friend Amy's dog. It was a lot of driving back and forth, but FBI agent Andrew Earl reminds Brinkman he missed something.
So there was he stopped at a Walmart at 7:11 a.m. on Saturday. Does that make sense? He made like a couple of purchases, like a knife and a sharpener and razors and like a work shirt. A couple things. Do you remember that?
Razors were for my face because my old razor was.
You like to keep the close cut on top, right? The shave.
Yeah.
Do you remember like what kind of knife it was? Like fold-out knife or like a?
I think it was
just like a straight
fold-out knife.
Okay.
It was silver.
Okay. About 3-inch blade. Maybe bigger.
No, not bigger.
Not bigger.
You can see what he's getting at here. Were any of these purchases used in the murders? Was this planned out ahead of time? But Brinkman insists it was just a pocket knife he bought, denying it was the knife he used to kill Suzanne.
So work shirt, work pants, razors for shaving.
Yeah, shaving cream too.
And shaving cream, like a foldable knife, and a sharpener.
Yeah.
They go over what type of knife it was several times, and Brinkman doesn't change his story. So they move on to how Brinkman was feeling before his deadly rampage.
Because honestly, I got tired of trying to rely on people. You know, if it wasn't for Amy, I'd be living in my van still. And I hate having to rely on people like that. So I was thinking about up and leaving, quit my job, just trying to go somewhere else and start.
Brinkman said he was going to leave enough food for the dogs and split.
And then I just felt that, you know, that everything I did for everybody wasn't appreciated. That, you know, some people that I would go to hell and back for in a heartbeat wouldn't even cross the street to pick me up off the ground.
But that's not what he texted Suzanne the day after he killed her. You heard right. Inside the case file, we got copies of text messages sent in the days leading up to and after the murders. Brinkman actually texted Suzanne Sunday afternoon saying, "Afternoon, how are you guys doing? Can't remember if you had softball today, so if you do, just text me later. Anyways, I thought a lot about what you said and you were right. I shouldn't run away from my problems, so I'm just going to stay and deal with them. We'll talk more later." He sent these text messages knowing full well Suzanne was dead. She died sometime Saturday afternoon. Was he trying to cover up his tracks? Brinkman even asks about a date she supposedly had Saturday night, a date no one else heard her talk about. He texts Suzanne again minutes later saying, "Sorry, forgot to ask, how did it go with that guy who was coming over to take you to dinner?" Again, this was on Sunday, about 2 hours before he killed the Stark County couple. Back in the interrogation room, Brinkman starts to confess to what happened to Bobby and Jean and breaks down.
Please, please, please tell the families. I know it doesn't count, but I am so sorry. I didn't intentionally do this. And I love them. They were like my family.
It's not like we can open this door and like there's a time machine that we could go in.
I know.
Right? That doesn't exist. We can only deal with the here and now because we can't change the past. And the best thing you can do is to be completely honest. And I'm not saying that you're not. I'm just saying you need complete honesty and take full responsibility for what you did, right? Because that's what's going to allow the family to have closure and to heal.
What happened that Sunday, the day after George Brinkman took the lives of Suzanne, Taylor, and Kylie, and set out for the Johns' house, waiting for them to get home from vacation? Did he go to their home planning to kill them too? Rajel John, known as Gene, was 71 years old, an Army veteran and small business owner. Roberta John, known as Bobby, was 64 years old, retired from working at a local school district. The couple had been married for 16 years. Brinkman talked to investigators about his drive down to Stark County after the murders in North Royalton.
I didn't even want to listen to the radio. I was just sitting there crying and just picturing everything that just happened over and over and over again. And I kept thinking, if I fall asleep, it's just a dream. It's just a dream. This is not happening.
That Sunday, when he got to Bobby and John's house, Brinkman says he took their dog Jack out on the porch, had a cigarette, and even did some yard work.
I mowed over on the side by the neighbors. I think I waved to them, I'm not sure. They've seen me there all week.
Then he got a text from the Johns saying they were an hour away. Brinkman decided to stay and wait for them. He says he walked around their house.
I'd seen that in the basement, on the desk, Gene had left a gun out.
He was curious because he didn't know Gene had a gun.
Yeah, I picked it up. I seen there was bullets on the side there. I was like, oh, all right, this is cool. I put the bullets in the clip, put the clip in the gun, and I did not have it cocked, but I'm sitting there twirling it around thinking, you know, I'm cool. I'm walking upstairs with it like, hey, you know, freeze, you know, walking around corners, freeze, pretending that, and then they pulled up. And Gene got out, and I was like, oh crap, I better go help him, and I left the gun out.
This was around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Brinkman says he carried in their suitcases, and Bobby went to the kitchen to see the dog. That's when he says she started yelling. A warning, what happens next is disturbing and graphic. We've pieced together parts of his confession here.
Said I wasn't giving Jack his medicine, his face was worse, what the hell was I doing there all week?
Then, he says, Gene saw the gun.
He started yelling at me too, what the f*** do you think you're doing, who the hell do you think? And I just grabbed the gun and said, shut up.
Brinkman says they continued to scream at him.
I don't want the neighbors outside to hear because they have a little kid.
You told Bobby to go upstairs?
I told Bobby and Gene to both go upstairs. I wanted them to sit on the bed.
In the bed that you'd been sleeping in?
Yeah. And she just wouldn't shut up. Gene wouldn't shut up. And then when we got up to the bedroom, I went to turn around and shut the door. And I heard Gene get up behind me. And I turned around and the gun went off. And it hit him in the hip. And I didn't know it was loaded I didn't know there was one in the chamber because I never...
You put the magazine in.
I put the magazine in, but I never pulled... I didn't know there was one in the chamber. And then and then Bobby started freaking because I just shot Gene. And it just went to hell really fast. He hits the floor. He's still moving, but he hits the floor.
Okay.
But Bobby, she snapped. She broke. I just shot her husband. I remember pointing a gun at her, telling her, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up.
Brinkman struggles to remember some details of what happened next. Bobby was still on the bed, and he says he smacked her in the head with the gun several times.
And then that's when Gene started to get up again, and I turned it around, and I just pulled the trigger 2 more times.
Can I ask you a question? So, you didn't know that that bullet was in the chamber?
No, I don't ever remember.
Yeah, it's okay.
No, it's
but,
not okay.
So, well, I guess my question is, so you shot him. I guess everything could have stopped then, but you just like freaking out again, and you got angry.
I lost it.
Because I mean,
I started.
You didn't know it was in there. You could have stopped, but now things kind of keep progressing, and
because I realized I screwed up again. I kept flashing back to the night before and how I panicked, and that started making me more panicky and panicky. And I'm like, oh no, 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 no. And that's when I started, Bobby wouldn't shut up, and I was hitting her. I was like, shut up, shut up, shut up. And Bobby wouldn't shut up. She wouldn't. And Gene started to get up because I was hitting Bobby. And that's when I shot him 2 more times. And then I turned around, I put Bobby's head down, I said, shut up. I said, please shut up. And I had the gun, and the trigger went off.
And then Brinkman says he smothered Bobby with a pillow.
I mean, all I kept thinking is the neighbors are going to hear. Please, God, don't let the neighbors hear. I've messed up already. Please don't let the neighbors hear.
5-10 minutes, Brinkman couldn't remember how long he held the pillow over Bobby's face. In total, he said he fired 4 shots, 3 at Gene and 1 at Bobby. These were people, just like Suzanne and her daughters, who trusted him.
When you shot Gene, there was a comforter. Do you remember? There's some pillows underneath them. Do you know how those pillows got there?
I think I put him under there so he would be comfortable. Because I know he got shot. I shot him in the hip, and then I thought he was still alive.
And just like he did after the murders in North Royalton, once he knew they were dead, Brinkman covered up his victims.
Did you cover him up like a blanket?
Yeah,
a comforter
when I left.
When you left.
Same with Bobby.
That's not the only similarity in the 2 separate attacks. You may have noticed something else similar in his confession here. Brinkman continues to feel like he's the victim, blaming their deaths on the real victims, saying this wouldn't have happened if they had just listened to him. Now that George Brinkman has confessed to all 5 murders, the FBI agent and deputy want to know where all of the evidence wound up.
Gene's wallet and Bobby's purse. Do you remember anything with that?
I remember Gene having his wallet in his hand. Bobby always carried her purse. And I didn't realize that Bobby had her phone in her purse, and that Gene had his in his pocket until we were walking upstairs, and I heard her phone go off, and I told her don't answer it. And I told her to throw everything in their pockets on the bed, because I didn't want to be... And it turned out, I think Gene had a knife.
On him?
On him. He threw it on the bed. I took it off, and I think I kicked it under the dresser where the TV is or something. I remember getting it out of his way. I took their phones. I put them up by the TV. Those I did take with me when I left. I threw them out the window while I was driving down the freeway.
Brinkman says he made Gene give him money out of his wallet before he killed him.
I was thinking about leaving, fleeing the state. At that time, I was in full panic mode. 5 people in 2 days, I just heard. 5 people that I cared about. Nobody's going to understand what happened. Nobody's going to care.
But key details deputies found at the murder scene don't match up to Brinkman's story. The deputy asks him about the handle to the bedroom door. Brinkman says when he left, he pulled it shut.
The outside door handle of that door.
Yeah.
Because it was off the door.
How did it? I don't remember anything about a door handle. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't.
Could it have been shot?
I don't. It was nowhere near where Gene was.
Deputies found the door handle on the floor, below where Gene's military uniform was hanging up. Brinkman swears he doesn't know how it got there.
Did they try to, flee to the room? Did they try to lock themselves in before?
No.
I'm just trying to figure, was there a struggle at the door?
No, they were. Gene was more concerned about Bobby getting hurt, so he told her to be quiet and listen. I'm getting frustrated. No, I'm getting frustrated because I want you guys to have the whole truth. And it's frustrating me that I can't remember.
We just got to ask the questions, right? If you remember, you remember. If you don't, you don't.
After the murders, Brinkman says he showered and changed. He left in his van, tossing his bloody clothes out the window. He also ditched a key piece of evidence on the highway.
The gun is dismantled in parts all over the place. I didn't want it to leave it together to have a kid find it or something. I threw the bullets out all over the place. Not in places where, on the freeway. I don't know, I call them dead zones where there's nothing there, no houses or anything. I did smash the clips up with the brass hammer I had in the back.
Where did you, when and where did that happen?
What?
That you smashed the clips up?
Before I left.
At their house?
Yeah, while I was in the van, letting it warm up.
A couple of hours pass as they go over the details of what happened again and again. Then, at the end of the interrogation, Agent Earl suggests Brinkman writes letters to the victims' families, explaining what he did. One letter Brinkman wrote addressed to the Taylor family and Dale, Taylor's boyfriend, who found them dead, reads in part, "No words or actions can ever describe or say how very sorry I am for what I've done. I never had any intention of hurting Sue or the girls. I love them all so very much. Maybe one day in the future, if you decide you want to sit down and talk, I can explain what happened." He goes on to say, "I cannot and will not ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it." Brinkman writes 2 more letters, one to his friend Amy. He was staying at her house when the standoff started with police.
Hey, can I look at these real quick before we go?
Go ahead.
The FBI agent played his role as the nice guy to the end, knowing these letters are now just another admission of Brinkman's guilt that can be used in court against him.
I respect what you did, man, with coming clean on this.
Oh, I thank you for everything.
I know that wasn't easy.
And with that, the interrogation ends. Agent Earl puts Brinkman's cast back on, and they all leave the room that they spent hours in, coaxing out not 1, but 2 confessions. After that, time passed slowly for the victims' families. They waited for more than a year to see Brinkman go up against all of this evidence in court. Brinkman wound up pleading guilty, waiving his right to a jury trial for the murders of Suzanne Taylor and her daughters, Taylor and Kylie Pfeiffer. And his case went to 3 judges in the fall of 2018. They sentenced George Brinkman to death. Taylor and Kylie's dad, Suzanne's ex-husband, spoke out in court right before their decision.
The reality is that George Brinkman Jr. took from all 3 of them the very right to breathe when he carried out his plan. Would the world be a better place without George Brinkman Jr. in it? I believe, as does the whole family, that the resounding answer to that is yes.
Nearly a year later, in October 2019, Brinkman faced 3 judges for the Stark County double homicide. Just like in the other case, since he pleaded guilty to all charges, under Ohio law, a 3-judge panel had to accept his plea and decide whether he was guilty of aggravated murder. The panel found Brinkman guilty on all counts after hearing from 4 witnesses. Here's Bobby's sister speaking in court.
"You were a monster, a vile, evil being that deserves to be put to death." The lives of all of us here today have been turned upside down and will never be the same because of you.
And Bobby's son.
I hate to say that anything in life is unfair, but this isn't fair. I was lucky enough to have 35 years with my mom and 20 or so with Jean. But for my children, for their other grandchildren, including 2 who will never know the depths of their love, and 2 more new great-grandchildren, this isn't fair to them or to my parents.
Before the panel imposed a death sentence, they held a hearing, and Brinkman spoke to the judges, saying he was responsible for what happened to Jean and Bobby, and, quote, they were extremely kind, caring, and wonderful people who did not deserve to be killed by me. He said he deserved the death penalty, and that's what he got. And that should be the end, right? Case closed. Time for the families to begin healing. A confessed killer spending the rest of his life in prison on death row, counting down the days he has left. But it turns out one mistake in court that doesn't come out until years later could change everything. I'm Sara Goldenberg, and you're listening to Dark Side of the Land. George Brinkman now spends his days behind bars in the Chillicothe Correctional Institution, about 200 miles southeast of Cleveland. He's in solitary confinement and has watched time move on, spending the coronavirus pandemic in prison. Because he got the death penalty, his automatic appeal waited to be heard by the Ohio Supreme Court. That day finally came in March 2021.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. The Honorable Chief Justice and Justices of the Supreme Court of Ohio.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Our first case this morning is 2019-303, the State of Ohio versus George C. Brinkman.
Oral arguments by attorneys on both sides flew under the public's radar for such a high-profile murder case. The judges and attorneys met together remotely because of the pandemic. The court's focus here was solely on the triple murder case of Suzanne, Taylor, and Kylie in North Royalton.
The state introduced, there are 3 victims. The state introduces a few photos.
Brinkman first pleaded not guilty in this case, but he later decided to plead guilty. That's when his attorney said a big mistake was made. A judge failed to advise Brinkman of his rights before he pleaded guilty in front of a panel of 3 judges. Here's attorney Jeffrey Gamso representing Brinkman.
And because death is different, we have special protections. We insist on special protections for not just for the defendant, but for the system, to be sure that we get it right, to be comfortable with having gotten it right, and to tell the people, the public, that we care about getting it right. In this case, we submit there is just massive failure across the board.
It was a structural error. The judge noticed it 4 days later, and they went back to the courtroom and read Brinkman his rights. But it wasn't enough. Here's Ohio's Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor.
He did A to Z once again, but merely did not ask your client, how does he plead?
That's correct. Yeah. Yes, Your Honor. That's correct. Nobody's paying attention. And the nobody's paying attention is sort of the continuing problem in this case.
Brandon Pateo, assistant prosecuting attorney, argued Brinkman went in front of the judges and accepted his plea, knowing what he was doing.
Mr. Brinkman was fully advised of each of his constitutional rights. Mr. Brinkman affirmed that he knew what he was pleading to, that he wanted to plead to those offenses.
When it came to Brinkman's confession, Pateo said the judges at the time considered this: the key questions never answered in this case.
How honest was Mr. Brinkman? What details did he provide? And the panel noted that that confession left the victim's family, left the police with unanswered questions. Questions about where his bloody clothes went. Questions about where the murder weapons went. Questions about why he described the murder weapon just as he had described knives, and as the police knew there were knives purchased at Walmart just before the murders, but so that those weren't the murder weapons. He claimed to leave money for the girls. He claimed that that was part of his purpose for going to the home. $800 each for Taylor and Kylie. nothing was left at the home. Nothing was found by police through multiple sweeps of the house.
Still, the evidence was not the issue. In the end, it came down to a shocking mistake that could cost the prosecution their case and the victim's families justice.
Structural error happened at the beginning. Mr. Brinkman is entitled to a new trial. At the very least, he is entitled to a new sentencing proceeding. This court's independent reweighing cannot cure the wealth of error in this case.
4 months went by as the judges considered. The days grew hotter into July when a decision from the Ohio Supreme Court stunned the victims' families. The court threw out George Brinkman's conviction and death sentence for the North Royalton case, the murders of Suzanne, Taylor, and Kylie. He won his appeal, and that mistake by the judges could now clear him in this case, giving him the chance at a new trial.
And there was so much evidence in court. He definitely was guilty.
It was a huge blow to Suzanne's brother, Ken Taylor. He can't believe he may soon have to face another excruciating trial.
Pretty upset, knowing that this happened over a mistake, and it's already hard enough having to go through it the first time and having to go through it again now. And there's so many concerns and so many questions, and you don't know anything. And you don't know how long it's going to take again to put it behind you.
Time marched on with delays and delays to George's pretrial hearings in court. In June of 2022, the victims' families marked a painful milestone. 5 years since George Brinkman brutally murdered their loved ones. Ken resembles Suzanne. He spoke to us outside at a park just days before that anniversary. Here, he talks about George.
I want to see him get the death penalty. He murdered 2 other innocent people, and that's 5 people, in a 2-day period. He doesn't deserve to be on this earth. He's a horrible person.
Ken says it's even more painful because they're in limbo again, waiting for justice. In the meantime, life for him has changed drastically over the last 5 years.
Well, everything's different. Holidays, I have no family left. That was my family, so.
I asked him to tell us more about his family. Can you tell us a little bit about Suzanne, and was she younger or older than you, and what it was like growing up?
She was older than me, and we had a brother-sister relationship. We had a lot of fun over the years, and she always stuck up for me, and I always stuck up for her. When it came to family stuff, and took care of each other.
What kind of person was she?
Well, she was a good person. She loved her daughters dearly. Loved animals, and plants and stuff like that.
What about your nieces, Taylor and Kylie? What were they like?
Oh, they were when they were around, anytime, it was so loud. They were so, they were amazing children, or amazing girls, and they were so talented. They were so smart, both of them. Taylor just loved country music and was a lot of fun, and Kylie was a lot of fun too.
And Taylor took her role as big sister seriously. She even sold her own car to give Kylie money for college. Ken says Kylie was always reading and excited to go back to college.
Kylie was going to be amazing because she actually was going to be a CSI investigator. That's what she was going to college for, which she would have been investigating this type of thing and helping other people, and they were just taken way too early. They used to go, every year to South Carolina and North Carolina with their mom, and they loved doing that. They loved traveling. And
so all of this was stolen from them?
Yeah, and us, or everyone here who remains,
As for George Brinkman, Ken knew him for decades, just like Suzanne had, but he didn't know him that well.
I knew him growing up. We went to school together. I wasn't close to him in any way.
And he didn't see him much until about 6 years ago when they were both at Suzanne's house at the same time. How did he come back into Suzanne's life?
I believe they started talking on Facebook, and then she invited him to come over for a cookout at her house, and I saw him twice. I saw him at that cookout, and I saw him on Easter that same year. He came to Easter dinner because my sister felt bad for him, that he was alone on a holiday. So she invited him over.
And that was the kind of person she was?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, if there was someone down on their luck, you know, or was lonely or something, she'd try and, you know, be nice and have them around. It's always fun. I mean, my nieces were so much fun. It was fun to be around them.
What kind of feeling did you get about him when you were around him?
I didn't like him, and the first time I saw him, after 20, 25 years or whatever, I didn't want him around my family.
Could you ever imagine it would go this far?
No, and I actually have thought, too, that my sister would have said something if she had thought it had gone this bad, because she would have asked me for help, you know.
Ken found out what happened from watching the news. He recognized Suzanne's house on TV before the victims had been identified.
So I kind of knew in my heart driving there, but I wasn't really sure until I got close, you know. It was a hard night.
He wants Taylor and Kylie to be known for the lives they lived, not how they died.
I just want them to know that, I mean, the people they touched, everybody that knew them, you know, I mean, Taylor and Kylie had so many friends. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, there was the first vigil they had was at North Royalton High School, and it was probably like 300 people there, 400 people. It was amazing. And just knowing that they touched that many people, they were nice to that many people.
He can't understand how someone his sister and nieces trusted so much could do this to them.
I feel like he took advantage of people that were just trying to help them and hurt them for no reason, which I don't understand. I have no idea why he did that. But everybody that he murdered, we're trying to help him.
And now, 5 years later, Ken feels like they're being victimized all over again. The whole court process has been stressful for him, and he just wants it to end. He's thankful for all of the hard work that went into a conviction during the first trial, but he worries this time around they won't get the justice his sister and nieces deserve.
I mean, I want him to get the death penalty, and I think that's the best thing for him.
How much of George Brinkman's confessions are the actual truth? And how much are what he wants people to hear, or what he wants to believe himself? We may never know. Whatever the truth is, the damage done is the same. The lives he took, and the lives he forever changed. From Suzanne's brother Ken to Taylor's boyfriend Dale, and Scott, Suzanne's former boyfriend. Our news crew spoke with him during the trial.
There's so many scenarios that you play over and over and over in your mind. But I would have rather been there and had her get me and let them all live than what happened.
Sergeant Ribicki, one of the local police officers who worked the North Royalton case, says years later she still thinks about the survivors, the people that walked away from this.
I think about the Pfeiffer family all the time, and Dale and Scott. Scott showed up with his 2 children, and it's like you almost hope that Scott would have entered, and maybe it wouldn't have happened. We don't know if they were passed away yet or not, but however, you stop and think that Scott had his 2 children in that car, and he would have killed them too. I mean, what's to stop him? He's already taken out 3. What's to stop him? So to me, that was huge, and that's what we tried to instill in Scott, that thank goodness you didn't go in that house that day with your children, because who knows what would have happened then. And I think that stands out the most. The survivors, Amy, stands out huge, because I fully believe had she not done what she done that weekend, she had gone away, she had stayed away an extra day. I think she was part of his plan, and I believe that he did have a plan. He meant to do everything he did.
And the unanswered questions are something the undercover officer who also worked the case says everyone will struggle to live with.
We found out the where, the how, the when, and all these other questions that we're able to answer, but all they wanted to know was why. And I don't think you're ever going to know why, and that's the only blank we can never fill in. There's no good reason why you kill 3 people. There never is.
Whatever happens next in this case, George Brinkman won't be getting out of prison anytime soon. He still sits on death row for the Stark County murders. He lost his appeal in that case, and his sentence stands. Everything will be decided in the next few months. Brinkman heads back to court in December. At that time, he could plead guilty again or move forward with a new trial, which has been scheduled for January 2023. So for now, the families and friends of Suzanne, Taylor, Kylie, Bobby, and Jean wait again to see what happens next, continuing to fight for justice and to keep their loved ones' memories alive. I'm Sara Goldenberg. Thanks for listening to Dark Side of the Land.
Subscribe now for future episodes and find more Dark Side of the Land and photo galleries related to these cases at cleveland19.com.